okay, to share. All right, we are recording. We are recording. So Jessica's in. Paul, when you're ready, you can launch this webinar.
You're muted, Paul.
So I'll start right now. Thank you, Peter. Sorry about that. All right, so I guess I'll welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us. I know there's a ton of other things you could be doing on this Friday evening, so we really appreciate you taking the time out of your schedules to really join us for this incredible webinar on offshore wind technology. First thing I'd like to say is I do have a list of people I would like to acknowledge, but I guess I'll first start off with thanking FCWC, the Federated Conservationists of Westchester County, for really helping organize this event, and also NYSERDA and Adrienne Downey for giving us, I guess, the resources that we'll be able to streamline to students. This is a very important event. Offshore wind technology is a fast-growing sector of renewable energy, and by Adrienne giving us not only an insight of the technology, but also the job opportunities and how to prepare for them, it's giving a lot of students a sneak peek on how we could prepare ourselves to pursue these jobs. You know, in the environmental movement, a lot of people put up the argument of economics being a barrier. So us being able to kind of fit economics into ecological protection really gives us a foolproof way of transitioning towards a cleaner economy and a stronger ecology as well too. So in terms of acknowledgements, obviously I'll start off with Ann Jaffe Holmes and Monica. Thank you so much, especially with their patience this past week. This was midterms week, so there's a lot of things that they were able to help out with in regards to outreach and transparency of this event. Also, our wonderful members of the board of directors for the Federated Conservationists of Westchester County, our fearless leader, Carol Durst-Wertheim, who is our board president, Carol Griffiths, who is our board secretary and the president emeritus of the board of directors, also Robert Carroll, Carolyn Cunningham, and Stephen Levy. We also have a couple of elected officials. I don't know if they're on the call right now or they will be joining us at some point. We have County Legislator Nancy Barr, who should be joining us, County Legislator Catherine Borgia. We also have the Majority Leader. I see her on the call. County Legislator Mary Jane Shimsky, and also Lisa Urban should be joining us from the District Office Director for State Assemblyman Steve Otis, who has been doing a lot of things for environmental protection and advocacy throughout the state of New York. So I guess we'll get to the program. I won't hold everybody up too much. Our first speaker is going to be, before I go forward, I do have to, this is a big mistake. I do want to thank the wonderful members of the steering committee for our student network, Bianca Jimenez. We also have from Mercy College, George Scott from Sarah Lawrence College, Dylan Klein from the University of Albany, Surreal Peter Singh from this Westchester Community College, Jasmine Morales Cisneros from Westchester Community College, Chelsea Green from Westchester Community College, Marissa Glaze from the Nellie A. Thornton School in Mount Vernon, New York. Am I missing anyone? I think that's about it. So we're really appreciative. We had Zoom calls for this event. So them joining us and helping put this together, it really started with that grassroots organizing. So speaking of grassroots organizing, I want to introduce our first speaker, who is a superstar in the Westchester County environmental movement, Caitlyn Carpenter, who is a leader for the Sunrise Westchester movement. She actually hosted a lobbying workshop 2 weeks ago with New York youth climate leaders on helping train young students on how to lobby members of government for fossil fuel divestment. So this is something that coincides with things that she's been working on, where not only could we advocate for divesting from the fossil fuel industry, but we also could tell them about the emerging technologies that could serve as a replacement. So I guess without further ado, Caitlyn, the floor is yours.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you all for being here, and thank you for having me. This is awesome. This education is so important. So my name is Caitlyn. I'm a junior right now at Mamaroneck High School, and I'm also a hub co-coordinator of the Sunrise Westchester Hub, and I also do Westchester field organizing for the New York Youth Climate Leaders, as mentioned. So I'm going to start I'm going to start us off by talking a little bit more about the importance of moving off of fossil fuels. So as a youth advocate, and a lot of us are youth here, the climate crisis is incredibly prevalent in our lives, right? The truth of the matter is, if we do not have a massive transition to renewable energy within this decade, our future will remain incredibly uncertain. To put it into perspective, I'm 15. If we remain with business as usual, by the time that I die, our planet will have experienced 3 degrees of warming. Right now, we're a little over 1 degree, and we're already seeing massive ramifications. I don't need to go on about this. You all know this. That's why you're here. So we want to talk about the solutions. Step 1, pretty obvious step, right, is ending our reliance on fossil fuels. So electricity is the second largest contributor to greenhouse gas emissions in the United States, and right now, only about 11% of our energy consumption comes from renewable sources. So why is that? Simply put, it's because there's a lot of money in that. So in my work with Sunrise, we are currently opposing a proposal for a fracked gas plant in Newburgh, New York, called Dan Scammer. To put it into perspective again, due to federal subsidies, if that plant is built, even if it only runs for 30 minutes and then, like, I don't know, an explosion happens or something, right? And besides, all the gallons of fuels that we poured into the Hudson, the plant will shut down. It won't be able to run. But even though it only ran for 30 minutes, investors will still get about $4 to $5 million from federal subsidies of that plant for like the next decade, which is ridiculous. And that's per year. So, and subsidies aren't even in the whole picture here. There are billions of dollars worth of investments from private investors put into the fossil fuel industry, contributing to its survival. The New York Youth Climate Leaders is working to pass a bill in the New York State Legislature this upcoming year called the Fossil Fuel Divestment Act, which would divest the New York State Common Retirement Fund from its current $10 billion holding in the fossil fuel industry. Having said all that, what does that have to do with offshore wind that we're right here for, right? So, we've been lobbying, NY2CL has been lobbying, and Sunrise has been fighting against the Dan Scammer power plant for about a year now, right? And whenever we've spoken with legislators or state assembly members or senators about either the FFDA or the Dan Scammer plant, their number one concern is, if we get rid of our divestments, if we get rid of these fossil fuel plants, where are we going to get our energy from, right? Are we going to have to pay significantly more for our energy? Are we going to run out of it? Are there going to be power outages? So that's why offshore wind is so important, and building these renewable resources is so important, because we cannot divest and, as I said, do our step 1, which is ending our reliance on fossil fuels, if we do not have an alternative to move to. And as a benefit, these alternatives are actually economically beneficial, incredibly economically beneficial. And that's why we're here today, to talk a little more about them. So again, thank you so much for having me. I look forward to this whole webinar. It's going to be awesome. I'll also put links to Sunrise Westchester if you're interested, as well as the New York Youth Climate Leaders. Both the Hub and New York Youth Climate Leaders are always looking for more interested and passionate people like all of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Caitlyn. Yes, Caitlyn does a lot of great work. So if you have any young people in your community that need resources or training with lobbying, even if they're able to vote yet, she's a perfect person to get in contact with. Also, Caitlyn will be co-moderating the Q&A section with me at the end. So if you have any questions throughout the program, feel free to put it into the chat. And we have our own private Google Doc that we're using to make sure that we're well organized and prepared for the Q&A section. All right, so our next speaker is Bianca Jimenez from Mercy College. She's a junior biology major and is the president of Mercy College's Student Environmental Alliance. She's a very active member of the steering committee for our student network, so we're really happy that she gave us the time today to be part of this program. So Bianca, I guess the floor is yours to say a couple of words.
Thank you, Paul. Oh, Caitlyn, thank you for all your work. You sound so smart. I want to know you more. Anyways, as Paul said, my name is Bianca Jimenez, and I am the president of the Environmental Alliance at Mercy College. I actually see a few of my members here today, so thank you guys for coming out. I really appreciate it. Today, I want to talk briefly about youth advocacy. I feel like the youth in America isn't doing enough. We never do enough. We don't care about anything until it directly impacts us. I feel like I sit in my college cafeteria and I see so many people using plastic forks and spoons. I feel like we leave the lights on in our houses in the rooms that we're not even using, and we take incredibly long showers for no reason whatsoever. I feel like we do not care because we are privileged and we haven't seen the impacts on us. But I can tell you that if we continue this negative, all these negative things, we're going to see the impact sooner than later. We're going to see the impact when our air quality is terrible. We're going to see the impact when our wildlife is extinct. And we're going to see the impact when all these things are threatening humanity as a whole. So we need to start making a difference now. We need to start getting out into the polls and voting. Which candidate is going to give money to renewable energy? We need to start researching this. I feel like I sit in my history classes and I see all these pictures of colleges protesting. What's happening right now with Black Lives Matter? We're seeing so many people going out and protesting and speaking for what they want. We need to do this with renewable energy. We need to do this with our environment. We need to go out and grow some gardens and do all these things because it's up to us. We need to stop allowing the older generation to make decisions for us, because unfortunately, they're not going to be in the future, and this is our future, and we need to protect it as a whole. So I ask you guys, please, if you're old enough to go out and vote, please go vote. Please reduce, reuse, and recycle. We've been hearing this since elementary school. We know how to do this. We just don't want to. We don't take the time to. So thank you, Paul, for allowing me to speak, and thank you everyone for coming here tonight. It's going to be a great night. I could feel it already, and we're going to learn so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Bianca. Yep, so also Bianca founded the Environmental Alliance at Mercy College. So it's really important that we have, environmental organizations, our academic institutions. If any of you need help with creating any environmental club at your respective academic institution or your high school and within your local municipality, feel free to reach out to us and we'll be able to help you out. All right, so our next speaker is the great Peter McCartt. He's our county's director of energy conservation and sustainability for the office of our county executive, George Latimer. Some people refer to him as the czar for our county's environment. He does a lot of great work with really making sure that we are on the right track, really pioneering his overall vision for sustainability for a healthier environment of Westchester County. So I guess without any further ado, Peter, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Paul. I really appreciate the introduction. You inflated my head here. So this is, you're running a tight ship too. So I got to get to my good stuff. We do have a lot of great stuff that's going on in the county. I'm going to rattle through some of it and then I'm going to tie it all together. The number one thing that we can do for Westchester, wind is not really one of them. I'm going to get to that, but we have solar programs. We have two large-scale solar phases, a phase 1 and a phase 2. I think some of you have heard about it. Our phase 1 is looking at about 9 megawatts of solar across 7 large-scale facilities, installations. And then the phase 2 is some of the properties that didn't make it into our phase 1, and also including in all the municipalities. Most of the municipalities, as well as the county, we get our electricity from NYPA, New York Power Authority, and it's one of the largest public-private partnerships in the country. And we're very fortunate that our electricity is actually 70% renewable, and that's mostly hydro, mostly Niagara and some of the other large-scale hydro projects. Fleet electrification, that's another thing. So we are electrifying our fleets. We have a total of 1,600 vehicles, and that includes 400 buses and mass transit. So our buses are already electric hybrid, and we're waiting on delivery of 6 full electric buses. So this is very exciting. we were able to get money from the VW settlement money. Remember, VW had lied about their efficiency on their vehicles, and they had to pay a big penalty, and we're going to get a good chunk of that money, but it has to go towards electrification. And you know, part of that is the charging station. These buses have massive batteries, and it takes a lot of electricity to charge them, which gets me to the wind and our solar again, remember? But we're rolling over our fleet. We're converting our fleet from combustion engines to electric and electric hybrid, and you know, plug-in electrics and that sort. We also have $60 million worth of energy efficiency capital projects that are in the works. These are things that have been sitting on the sidelines, and they were ready to go for the most part. And over the past 2.5, 3 years, working in conjunction with the Board of Legislators, we've been moving these quickly through and into construction phases. And some of them are not very sexy. You know, it's like replacing a steam pipe, but it saves so much energy, and it's a really good investment, and they pay back. So one of the things I think is kind of sexy, is the fact that we're going to have a mechanism to capture methane from our wastewater treatment plant in Yonkers, and use that methane to then power the plant in itself. And Yonkers is one of the largest wastewater treatment plants, you know, on the Eastern Seaboard. It's a massive facility. There's a bigger one out in Queens. But let's see, what else? Well, anyway, I'll just get right to it. You're running a tight ship here. So electrification, we're moving towards electrification. We have solar upstate, we have hydro, and now we got these wind projects. These are very large scale wind projects. And what we see, this is a great starter here for all of us here in the county. But what we're working on is bringing these jobs to Westchester. We're right now currently planning to have a job fair right around this, the wind projects. That'll be sometime in 2021. We're just in the early planning stages for that, but that's very exciting. I'm sure we'll be working with FCWC and Aunt Jeffy Holmes and our BOL and WCC and everybody else here. So that's about it. I could go on and talk about this stuff all day. I love this stuff. It's so great to see all these wonderful faces here. Most of them I know, and there's some new people that I've met. Caitlyn and I have been talking a bunch, and Paul and I have been working together for a while, and Mary Jane and everybody. But keep up the good work. I'm always here. I'm very available, very transparent. I'm very accessible. And I'll put my contact information if you have any more questions, but I can talk about this all day. Let's move on. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Peter. All right, so our next speaker is kind of our keynote, our primetime speaker. It's Adrienne Downey, who is the principal engineer for Offshore Wind of NYSERDA, the New York State Energy and Research and Development Authority. So we really appreciate Adrienne for really taking the time out of her schedule for presenting us this information. We have some students that weren't able to attend this webinar, so it's really great that we'll be recording this so we can then share with academic institutions to get the word out to students that are pursuing degrees in environmental science or even engineering science. So I guess the floor is now yours, Adrienne, and we really appreciate having you this evening.
Thanks so much, Paul. I really appreciate the opportunity. It's an honor to be here with all of these just incredibly passionate speakers, and you know, just enormous credit to you all first and foremost for taking the initiative in recognizing your agency in determining our climate future. Just, you know, full on hats off to each of you, and your voices are powerful and you're making them heard, and that's what this is all about. So anything that I can do to help equip your voices, you know, that's the name of the game here. We're trying to offer you, you know, tools and information is powerful, and it's up to you to use it, and you've got our full support. So I could not be more excited to be here. So yes, I'm Adrienne Downey. I'm the principal engineer for Offshore Wind with NYSERDA. For those of you who are not familiar with NYSERDA, We are the state authority that tackles energy issues. It's kind of a crude way to put it, but we're sort of the state's think tank and do tank as far as clean energy programs and policies are concerned. And my role within the organization is to help lead our offshore wind program, which is probably just about the coolest job that I could have ever imagined. So I'm a lucky person, and really excited to be here and to share, so what is going to be some really exciting years to come here in the state of New York with regards to our clean energy future overall. And so with that, we'll just kick right into it if that works. And let me know if you did that advance properly. Excellent, thumbs up, great news, great. So indeed, we heard from Caitlyn, just how powerful, our electricity sector is in terms of contributions toward greenhouse gases. We heard from Peter as well about, our work across the state to deepen our electrification processes. This is all, we know that the 21st century and beyond is all going to be deeply electric. We are all, right now, this is real, this is live, and it is all powered by electrons. And so as we think about climate change and climate action, and it is absolutely our state's priority to be delivering on the most aggressive decarbonization legislation in the country, that we do so with a very clear eye as to what we need from our electricity sector. So last year in the July of 2019, New York enacted, again, the most aggressive legislation in the nation with the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act. And that act, puts an incredibly ambitious goal on the table that says that by 2040, we will have a 100% clean and carbon-free electricity system. That is huge. And in infrastructure terms, that's tomorrow. So we're going to be talking a little bit about the solutions today, and offshore wind being one of them to get us there. But just starting, again, as we think about all of these different uses, it's such a dynamic time and scenario. When we talk about 100% clean, we know that we're going to need to be relying upon particularly renewable energy to get us there. And so in addition to 100% clean, part of that goal is making sure that at least 70% of our renewable energy is being delivered, of our energy is being delivered by renewable sources by 2030. And that's really, again, going to power, everything that we do, from our street lamps to our cars, to our laptops, to this webinar, all of the above to help give us really what is a 21st century lived existence and now. So we've been working on this for a number of years. We've been working on all of our renewable energy planning and goals. We've been ramping things up substantially over the past number of years. Even since 2017, we've already awarded more than 70 projects worth a combined total of over 6.1 gigawatts, which is just a tremendous amount of power. So this is statewide, right? So we've got solar projects in every corner of the state. We've got hydroelectric. Peter, you referenced that. Certainly legacy, but also new. We've got onshore wind projects, energy storage projects. These are all comprehensively looked at in this Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, but it's the confidence that we have as a state to go forward with that act is predicated upon lived experience and in contracting already with this suite of projects. And so in addition, last year, we were very excited to be able to announce at the same moment in time as the signing of the act was the announcement of our first offshore wind projects on a statewide basis. And so that's what we're going to be focusing on here today. But it really is, just a tremendous amount of progress that we've already made in this space, and we'll be only increasing that trajectory going forward with additional projects being led in successive procurements. And I don't know if anyone has been following, but really just exciting this week, the Public Service Commission yesterday, in fact, just published what is called the Clean Energy Standard Order, which now sets into not only we have the legislation, but now we have the regulatory authorities to be moving forward with steady annual procurements for renewable energy projects, both onshore and offshore, so as to be able to realize our goals. And so that was a really, a huge milestone that the Public Service Commission, which are our state regulators here in New York, they published that order yesterday, and it will set forth, all of the actions, the tactics, and the market design that will enable us to realize our 70% renewable energy goals by 2030. So the CLCPA specifically carved out, a huge target for offshore wind as part of our state's comprehensive package of looking at the resource availability. And we said, okay, in order to make sure that we're able to get to 100% clean, we need to rely upon what is really an incredible resource that is available to us through offshore wind. And so the statute really carved out not only our total goal, but specifically for offshore wind as a technology, a goal of 9,000 megawatts of offshore wind by 2035. So that's what I'm tasked with helping to deliver to the state. And what we are doing is, not only offering a tremendous amount of energy, and Paul, you referenced this in your remarks, but a really comprehensive package of economic development in addition to decarbonized electricity. So we're talking about, again, 9,000 megawatts of offshore wind by 2035 is approximately enough to power 6 million homes within the state, and will comprise by 2035 around 30% of New York's electricity load in terms of its contribution onto the grid, which is a really exciting prospect, again, from a carbon-free perspective, but it's also intended to deliver around 10,000 jobs, which is really exciting. And what I want to make sure that we spend some time focusing on for this group, because when you think about when this is happening, by 2035, those projects are going to be up and running. This is your lifetime. We are doing this now, and these are jobs that are going to be perfectly accessible to your next couple of years, like the next 10 years. This is all going to be taking off. You're going to be entering the workforce. You're going to be thinking about, what do you want your first jobs to be in? What do you want your second jobs, your career, really? And then these projects beyond 2035 are going to be not only built, that's an operational target, making sure that they're online and up and running, but they're going to be operational for the next 25, to 30 years thereafterwards. So this is, a prospect that I want to share and be really explicit. Like this is a new career trajectory for everyone who's on this call as a student. And I think that's a really exciting prospect. So what is offshore wind? And hopefully, some of it's fairly obvious, but just want to make sure that we level set here in terms of understanding. So offshore wind is large scale renewable power, large scale wind energy from the Atlantic Ocean. And so from installation of wind turbines in lease areas, you can see those marked here in blue. Projects are being designed, will be constructed, developed, and then eventually obviously installed, but commissioned and start to deliver from these blue areas. We work in tandem with the federal government, who is effectively the landlord in the water. So it's the Department of the Interior and their Bureau of Ocean Energy Management that specifically, or BOEM as we call them, that specifically works to effectuate the permitting and approvals in those offshore spaces. But obviously they're delivering the power to New York State, and when you come in within 3 nautical miles of the state borders, then you're into state territories and state permitting and approval regimes. So we work, very closely with the federal government and with adjacent states, and you can see here that New York is really poised to be central within the region that is actively advancing offshore wind. The states, from New Hampshire through Virginia, if you had asked anyone 3 or 4 years ago, there was no offshore wind market. There are now aggregated totals and targets that are pushing 30 gigawatts. So New York's 9 gigawatt target is by far leading the pack. But we are centrally located as well. And so when we are thinking about this, again, from an economic development perspective and from a jobs creation perspective, we are cognizant of not only our projects, New York's projects, if you will, but also the fact that this is a workforce that is going to be servicing the region's offshore wind projects as well. So I just wanted to make that distinction. So when we talk about offshore wind, again, you know, why? And so, you know, we think about, you know, the enormous potential for clean renewable power. You know, certainly upstate, we are blessed with many resources, but downstate's been tough. It's been very difficult to decarbonize New York City and Long Island in particular, because they're so built out, right? There isn't the space that you need to do large scale penetration of renewable energy projects there en masse. And that's what we need in order to start, you know, turning off these peaker plants and to decarbonize that grid. We need an option. We need a solution. And so what we're advancing is offshore wind is a really powerful tool in our state's toolkit to do that. And it's that proximity to load where it's needed the most that is really compelling. In addition, we're going to see, you know, tremendous investments in infrastructure and communities. I mean, it's one thing for us to talk about the peaker plants and the obvious moral and social need that is imperative in that transition, but these are also old facilities. So we're talking about, you know, major investment in a future grid that is going to be bring, you know, tremendous benefits, particularly to coastal communities who are also, as we know, you know, on the front lines of climate change and the most susceptible to the effects of sea level rise and storm surge, and you know, the severity and intensity of storms is only going to be increasing. So there's this double win that's happening with the locational specificity of the investments. Again, thousands of short-term and long-term skilled jobs are anticipated with this industry, and it will deliver, you know, a more diverse and resilient electricity supply. And then fundamentally, you know, all of this is about reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So the CLCPA, again, the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, not only sets forth our goals for decarbonizing our electricity supply, but also to reduce our carbon emissions by 85% by 2050. And so this is all about driving down carbon. And again, offshore wind has a really unique opportunity to help us do it, given particularly the carbon emissions from the New York City and Long Island grids. So how are these projects built? You know, you think about what an offshore wind turbine is and what it isn't, and we saw on the last slide, you know, these are huge components, right? They're, you know, once they're installed, they're about the better part of 3 times the size of the Statue of Liberty. So these projects, you know, there isn't a wind turbine blade or a tower from these projects that is going to be going down anybody's main street anytime, anywhere soon. They're just too big. So it's really reliant upon port infrastructure investment, and the state is doing a tremendous amount of work in this regard. So we are, and we'll get into this in a few minutes, but you know, we are in the process of investing up to as much as $400 million in private and public capital with a matching mechanism to incentivize you know, port infrastructure development that we anticipate is going to, you know, tremendously unlock the economic development potential that is associated with this industry. So, you know, we need to have manufacturing of components eventually happening here in the United States. You know, that is a goal that we are really excited about and not shy about. You know, this is a global industry, but we want to be home to, you know, the good quality jobs and manufacturing prospects that it brings. So whether we're talking blade manufacturing or tower manufacturing or, you know, nacelle assembly, you know, internals, you know, these are complex pieces of equipment and all the electricals that go into them. And so again, when we think about this industry, we're also thinking about the role of port infrastructure development, because that will help to, again, unlock that localization potential. So these projects are you know, basically an assembly of components, what we would call, so wind turbine components, you know, the tower, the nacelle, the blades. They are installed in the ocean on foundations that are either, there's a couple of different designs that are used, but they are effectively seated on the ocean floor or piled into the ocean floor. There's a couple of different technologies, and it depends really upon, like, same thing with your house. You know, what is the foundation of your house built on? Well, it depends upon what's underneath it. So we look at the geotech and the geophysical properties of the ocean floor in different locations, and then make an installation that suits those needs and the loading, obviously, that these turbines would affect. But they're really, you know, an intricate puzzle of incredibly sophisticated componentry, a very sophisticated installation protocols, really, deeply specialized maritime assets in terms of these vessels. I mean, you're seeing in the bottom left here, there's what's called a jack-up vessel. So this is literally a vessel that, goes out into the ocean, plants its feet on the ocean floor, raises up out of the water, because to be doing huge lifts, while on the rolling seas is a really difficult thing. So it's just everything about this industry is very bespoke and very specialized. And so, again, from a training perspective and from a workforce development perspective, these are going to be, fabulous jobs, really exciting and enriching opportunities to play a role in helping to build these projects. But it's also important that, we've talked a lot about decarbonization, we've talked a lot about jobs, and those are definitely foundational to why we're pursuing offshore wind as an industry and as a solution. But we also have to be mindful, our presence as humans has impacts. Everything that we do has an impact. So how is it that we are, working to understand what those impacts are and to mitigate those impacts? So we think about, the Atlantic Ocean is a really busy place. It is one of the, our New York's harbor is one of the largest harbors in the United States, a huge economic driver for our entire economy. The commercial fishing industry has a rich cultural heritage, as well as economic prospects for many New Yorkers. But also, there are just a tremendous diversity of species who call the ocean home. And so when we embarked on the prospect of offshore wind, we spent a lot of time studying the space, studying who lives there, whose livelihoods are there. And we've been working, very diligently with stakeholders and experts in order to understand the space and to be working in a way that is both responsible, but also cost effective, recognizing that there's just a depth of expertise and knowledge that behooves one in undertaking this endeavor. So we've been working for the past number of years on building up that repository of deep knowledge, and again, working very, very closely with experts and stakeholders in this space in order to make sure that we are very informed in our approach to this exciting, but also, very responsible new industry. And so with sort of that baseline of knowledge and work that we had done, we were really excited last summer to announce our first projects. And so, we can talk all day about, the merits of clean power and renewable energy, but we need projects, and we need projects in order to get these on, these green electrons flowing, and also to deliver on these jobs. And so we were really excited to go into the market and solicit our first suite of projects from Empire Wind at 816 megawatts, located centrally in the New York Bight. Looks like a little pizza slice in the ocean. And then the Sunrise Wind project at 880 megawatts. So these two projects are on a statewide basis and contracted by NYSERDA. It is in addition to a single project that the Long Island Power Authority commissioned or contracted with in 2015 for the South Fork Wind Farm at 130 megawatts. And so in aggregate, we're starting to see that already New York has more offshore wind under development than any other state in the nation. And we are in the process right now. In fact, bids are due next week for our second round of projects, where we are soliciting proposals for up to as much as 2,500 megawatts. So we've got 1,800 megawatts. We're about to add another 1,000 megawatts up to 2,500 megawatts. So we're making really, meaningful progress towards our 9,000 megawatt goal. And these projects are intended to come online between 2022 with South Fork being a little bit earlier on, and Sunrise Wind and Empire Wind coming online towards the end of 2024. And so, the question is, well, what happens between now and then? 2024 sounds really far away. It's really not in terms of infrastructure growth and progress. We've gone through the process of research and stakeholder engagement. Again, in 2017 and 2018, we were heavily involved in all of that deep sector research that I was describing. And we published what is an award-winning plan called the New York State Offshore Wind Master Plan that comprehensively builds that together. Subsequently, we've been working on proposal review and our first contract awards with Sunrise and Empire. Next, these projects are moving steadily through their permitting and approvals processes. Again, that's both on a statewide basis for all of the onshore aspects of the project, the interconnection to our grid, but also with regard to the offshore portions that are under the dominion of our federal government. Manufacturing is going to be coming in quick succession, right? As soon as you've got your permits, it's going to be off to the races for these projects. And so manufacturing, we're going to start seeing happening here in our state. There's going to be already some gravity-based foundation designs that are being proposed for the Port of Queen's up in the capital region. As local construction. There's also a variety of steel manufacturing componentry that's going to be happening. And then these projects are moving into construction and installation phases. So again, out in the ocean and using that combination of port infrastructure to gather and aggregate the components, to stage the components, and then to take them out to the ocean for their installation and commissioning. Once commissioned, we start to see power flowing back to the grid. And so that's, towards the end of 2024 and early 2025. And then we get into operations, which is delivering clean electrons for the next 25 years under contract with our state. And so the shift here is going to be, in watching these projects, move with the security of an offtake agreement or an understanding with the state of New York, that they're able to march steadily towards these goals. And so what does that mean from a jobs perspective as well? So, there's a cycle, like any infrastructure project, to its progress. So it starts with selection of a project. And once you've got a project and you've got a confirmed contract with the state, then you have the financial certitude to be able to start building your project in earnest and marching through all those sequential steps and making those investments in the state, in our port infrastructure, and in job creation. And so once the project has been confirmed, and you can basically think about that as at the zero mark in our axis here, we're ramping steadily up, right? And we're going to see that the peak of construction for each of these projects is going to be at the highest point is going to be, the construction and the installation work, being a tremendous job creation, but it's very specific in time. And then what we see at the end of that is this tail, this deepening down, and that relates to the long-term operations and maintenance careers that are associated with these projects. But what happens is that when we've got projects that are happening in sequence with one another. And when we talk about a 9 gigawatt goal, it's not only a big goal, but it makes for a longer goal. And we start to offer something really exciting to the industry, which is reliability of our procurement activities. And that gives them, stabilization. If they want to build a supply chain, you want steady production. You don't want a pig in a python. You really want to have, certitude that there is not only depth, but also longevity to the market. So these are the signals that New York is making, robustly to would-be investors. And when we say that, we're talking about manufacturers like Siemens. We're talking about GE, obviously, is a local New York company that's heavily involved in offshore wind. There are thousands of companies that all become part of this deep ecosystem, cable manufacturing. And these are all jobs of the future, literally, in that they service, a reliable and a sustainable form of electricity supply. And so when we think about our program, we are thinking about it not only in terms of our climate action now, but also those signals that will offer enough certitude to the industry to be able to contemplate, really significant investments in our state. And so that's the value proposition that we are hoping to offer, to the external world, but then to New Yorkers, right? Like, this is longevity as well in your career path. It's not, that there's a bubble and it bursts. This is reliability of jobs that we're seeking to create as well. And what are these jobs? And so we can think about them in different cycles or different parts of the planning cycle. In pre-planning and pre-development, a lot of that is desktop. And what does desktop mean? Well, it means that it's all using data sets, GIS, lots of paperwork and literature reviews. We've got attorneys, we've got engineers, we've got financial analysts and permitting specialists and scientists that are all really helping to conceptualize what does a project look like and how should it be built. Once you have moved from your pre-planning or pre-development and you start getting a contract, again, you're starting to move into operationalizing your project. So we start thinking manufacturing and assembly, which could be, certainly all of New York's strength in organized labor and trades. Our skilled trades here in the state are exceptionally well poised to be able to participate in, assembly jobs and control systems, welding. It's really soup to nuts when you think about the manufacturing floor. And then on to installation and commissioning. This is a very specialized workforce. These are huge components. And so the crane operation opportunities, dock workers at these ports, iron workers, line workers, painters, pile drivers, plumbers, welders. Like, it's going to take an enormous village of people to be executing on these projects. And then into the O&M side of things, we're talking about, again, service technicians, but also, there's lots of administrative work. There's lots of IT work. I mean, these are all, these are turbines that are remotely controlled, for the most part. And so very much of a digital nature, just as much as they are of a physical nature. And we see that here with a couple of glimpses, into what these jobs are going to be looking like. And these are really extreme environments in many regards. And so the technical skills, the health and safety skills and training, there's just going to be such an investment made by these projects and by the project developers, but all of their suppliers and teams to really cultivate an excellent workforce. And obviously, New York is doing our part there as well. So in order to help make sure that we are making the linkages between the base skills that we have and the skills that we know that New Yorkers are going to need to be able to get in on this industry and be front in line with a resume ready to go. We're working on rolling out, and hopefully we'll have more to share in the next couple of weeks, an initiative that Governor Cuomo put forward in this year's State of the State, which is for $20 million in workforce training and development funding, specifically to help bridge the needs of this new and exciting industry with the skills that New Yorkers already have. But that doesn't mean to say that for many of the jobs that the skills that you're already busy acquiring, and really excited to hear from some of the students, on the applicability. There's already so much that again, our workforce, our exceptional workforce, has to deliver, even as of today, to this new industry. And so with that, I'm going to conclude, and we can be more than happy to turn to questions. So Caitlyn and Paul.
Okay, so we have a couple of questions that are here. I guess our first one is from Laisa. She said, how would the locations of the offshore wind projects be chosen? And what are the prerequisites for them to be selected?
Sure, great question. And if we can, if it's not too confusing, I think it might just be nice to have a look at the map again. So great question, like I said. So the areas that are marked in blue are existing lease areas. The areas that are marked in green are what they call draft wind energy areas. And so what you see here is the transition, which is, I think, the crux of your question, is to the process of deciding where these projects should go. So what the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management does is it puts out a call for interest in key areas. And it says, you know, what is the interest in prospectively developing offshore wind in this space? And it opens up a deep consultative process with stakeholders, right? I mean, the maps that are behind where these go are, you know, so many, there's like literally thousands of maps that are layered on. It's shipping and navigation maps that get on that are added on here. There's, you know, economic reports from commercial fishing as to where they're, you know, what are their transit lanes and where do they need to be fishing. You know, there's Department of Defense has, you know, has various installations in various locations. And so what you're trying to do is find those areas in the ocean that have the most resource potential, but the least conflict. Meaning other uses that are you know, preeminent. You know, why is the Equinor lease area this funky pizza shape? Well, it's because there's giant transit lanes on either side of the channel facilitating access, or there's anchorages in some areas and other assets in other areas. And so it's this consultative process that transitions between what is called a draft area, that is then the subject of a lot of consultation and debate. And if you're interested in learning more, you can go to the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management's website. Just Google New York Bight Task Force, BOEM, and you'll get, you know, all of the presentations that stakeholders make and are part of the public record that show, you know, this is why we advocate for this area because of X, Y, Z reasons. And then you'll have the next stakeholder that will say, well, we advocate for, you know, this area differently, or we agree, or we disagree, et cetera, et cetera. And so it's a matter of having that public dialogue and with stakeholders to really figure out what are the right areas. And then once these draft wind energy areas have been sufficiently studied and discussed, and the consequences or the opportunities weighed, then BOEM they basically convert the lease areas from draft into an active leasing. And so the leasing process is an auction-based process, and where private companies can bid to develop the parcels, the right to develop the parcels.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Great. So our next question is from Jonathan, and it is, how would we protect these offshore wind structures with the extreme weather events that are increasingly becoming more extreme with global warming?
That's a great question, Jonathan, and one that we're talking about, you know, our future grid, and we know that our future is changing, right? Our future climate has already changed and is increasingly changing. So climate adaptation is definitely something, and resiliency. So two parts of the same conversation, acknowledging that the future climate is changing and the risks and severity of storms is increasing. So we are actually about to publish in the next couple of weeks a study specifically on the topic of offshore wind resiliency, where we look at all of these various factors. You know, how do we think about the turbines themselves? How do we think about, you know, their loads? What are they currently designed to be able to accommodate? And what we see is that you know, the turbines in their design, and there are like international standards to which they are designed, are I mean, I'm never going to say that Mother Nature, I mean, she's powerful, and I give her every ounce of respect. But these turbines are designed to be weather beaten. You know, they're designed to be in the ocean and facing brutal conditions. Like, that's what they're made to do. And so, you know, when we look at, you know, the height of the storm, and we actually had Met Ocean buoys out in the Bight collecting wind data a couple of, you know, over the past number of weeks, where Tropical Storm Isaias was coming through, and we were looking at it, and, you know, the winds that were seen in that tropical storm were a fraction of the load that these turbines can ultimately sustain. So we have a lot of confidence that the equipment is robust, and is being right-sized to fit not only our current climate moment, but also the climate changes that are anticipated over the next 50 years. But that said, again, Mother Nature is powerful. And so, we monitor the projects and their progress, and that's what, the operations and maintenance crews are designed to do, is to help, restore power if, an individual turbine, has a failure of some description. There's lots of redundancy within an array, underneath all of these turbines, there's a whole suite of electrical cabling that connects them to each other and to the grid. So there's lots of redundancies as well that are part and parcel of the electrical design. But it's a great question.
All right, thank you. Before I read off the next question, I just want to recognize Chuck Lesnick, who joined our Zoom call, former FCWC board president and the former city council president for the city of Yonkers, New York. So we're happy, Chuck, you joined us. And also Nortrid Spiro, another Federated Conservation of Westchester County board member. Also Chloe Fernandez, who is the project coordinator for the Family Services of Westchester Youth Council. So, all right. So
good to be here, Paul. You're doing a great job, and it's great to see so many young faces on this. I'm so glad when I'm in the upper echelon of age now.
Oh, no problem. Thank you. Our next question is from William. It is which areas have you chosen to have offshore wind, and how could it be sustainable to the oceanic environment of aquatic animals?
So, it's interesting. So the first two projects that we have awarded are this pizza slice in the middle, the Empire Wind project, and then the Sunrise Wind project, which is about 30 miles east off the coast of Montauk. But we have the ability to access all of the projects that are cost effectively to potentially buy power from projects that are spanning the entire region that's shown here on this site. And so, these are all areas that, again, per the leasing process that I had just described, have already been demonstrated as part and parcel of their leasing to be of minimized conflict overall. And that speaks to, the diversity of ocean users, but also of species, right? Those are additional maps that are tremendously helpful in understanding, what are sensitive ecologies and where should we not be building. And so that is part of the process that is already undertaken in the determination of which areas to lease. So turning them from green to blue, it's part of that discussion. But when we think about, offshore wind, certainly we're sensitive to the installation methods and making sure that we are cognizant, which times of the year are there migratory species that we need to be thinking of, is it breeding season? Is it, so all of these projects are designed in careful consultation with an understanding of the ecology, who lives there? And there are many species that do. And so to be working in a way and designing a project isn't just designing the physical infrastructure that is ultimately built. It's also designing the installation plan and process. When are we installing foundations? When are we installing turbine parts? When are we installing the cable infrastructure? All of that has to be done in very close coordination with, again, an understanding of the species that are present and seeking to minimize impacts. And so we work really closely with sector experts, environmental activists and NGOs in the space, to make sure that we have a really solid understanding of what the ecological needs are and to give them priority. And so we work in we use what we call environmental and fishing mitigation plans. So we work with industry. We were actually the first state to go forward with that type of an approach. So in addition to our contracting mechanism where we say we're going to buy your project, we said we also want you to give us a very detailed plan about how you are going to be actively mitigating your effects in the environment. And that is an evolutionary process, right? The more you know about the space and the more you know about your project, we expect you to be updating your mitigation plans and discussing them live with stakeholders in order to evolve them with the best of what science has to offer at that time, as also the best information that you have about the project and its constructability. And then what can we discuss and understand as mitigative solutions? So things like, the Empire Wind project, again, this little pizza slice here in the middle, is being proposed to be built with gravity-based foundations. And gravity-based foundations you can think about as kind of like the patio umbrella on your deck. It's this big, heavy, weighted structure that holds the umbrella. It's like that. So you float it out, it's made of concrete, and then you sink it into the bottom of the seafloor. And that is a design that is recognized as a very quiet foundation. So the ability to install it without necessarily driving piles, which specifically in the Bight, there's a lot of whales, a lot of cetaceans, a lot of dolphins. They're acoustically sensitive species. So how can we make sure that we are building this as quietly as possible is a major consideration. Another consideration is that same foundation, particularly gravity-based foundations, become artificial reefs. I mean, these are disruptive to a degree in their construction, but then also potentially very beneficial as habitat for species, on an ongoing basis. And we're starting to see more and more, opportunity to look at, creation of habitat, particularly in response to climate change and climate adaptation, and the fact that biodiversity, risk and species loss is an issue. So to the extent that there is a symbiotic potential for offshore wind, not only for our electric and energy resources, but also as a habitat potential for species, is something that we're looking at very closely and is very exciting. Any other questions, Paul or Caitlin?
Yeah, there's a lot more questions, Adrienne. Caitlin had to leave, unfortunately. Bianca, maybe you could help Paul with the question asking. Paul's got it all in a Google Doc now, Adrienne. He's working it. It's a lot of questions for you.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
No, it's a pleasure. They're great questions.
They are great questions, and there's plenty more. Paul, are you there?
Yeah, Bianca, are you going to read the next question, or do you want me to? I can read the next one. All right, so next question is all right, it's from Jonathan, and Jonathan Diaz, and he is asking, how would we make the infrastructure more resilient to extreme weather events? I think you kind of did touch on this in a previous question, but I don't know if you want to provide any further clarification.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of ways that we can think about it. So, we're interested in thinking about resiliency, in a number of ways. We talked about how much coastal infrastructure is going to be, port infrastructure, but also, additional cables that are going to be coming to our shoreline. The prospect of how we design those today in anticipation of a future climate that's changing, is going to beg questions of, how deeply is a cable buried? How, is it above ground or is it below ground? Is it, what are we doing with the port infrastructure? Is it, how are we buttressing those walls? So it's really about strengthening, but also trying to find, solutions that are again, this sort of symbiotic in nature. When we talk about, habitat creation from the foundations, we also think about, solutions that can exist for cable. So when cables are put onto the bottom of the ocean, you can layer materials over them, what they call cable mattresses, that help to keep the cables on the bottom of the ocean. Those can also be incredibly powerful opportunities for habitat creation, which from a resiliency perspective actually makes them stick to the bottom of the ocean that much better. So how can you design something from a surface chemistry, but also shape and design to encourage ecosystem growth on the infrastructure? Things as classical as foundations, right? What is the loads that are anticipated under high winds? How can we be buttressing those? What about sea level rise? Are we talking like how tall does a foundation need to be? Well, it's, for the height of the ocean today, but it's also the height of the ocean in 50 years from now. These are the things that the industry is very actively looking at as all sort of material ways along various aspects of the project that you can build for the future as much as for today.
Perfect, thank you. Can you guys hear me now? Okay, perfect. All right, the next question is from Liza, and she's asking, what are the impacts on the environment from the construction and maintenance of the structures?
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, when you put anything in the ocean, there's an impact. So, we have to talk about, I think we spoke a little bit about the actual physical infrastructure that's there, right? And the ways that the physical infrastructure can either work in symbiosis with the ecologies or not. Those are things that we think about in the design of the turbines themselves and all of the equipment and arrays. And we think about the installation process, particularly the timing. So we speak about, migratory patterns, trying to avoid, key seasonal activities for species, breeding seasons, in particular, or, likelihood of calves and the like. So it's understanding the ecosystems that are there. What are the species? What are they doing? When are they doing it? And then working around those seasonal schedules in order to minimize any conflicts. There's a lot of work as well with all of the vessels in terms of data science, having scientists on board who are doing, their own independent research. You have a fleet of vessels that are suddenly out there. So you have even more opportunity to be doing, active science in the space and understanding, how the installation methods, can be steadily improved. You've got, opportunities for, things like, having someone trained on board to be watching out for species, to avoid collisions and strikes. I mean, those are all things that again, the industry is working, very closely with environmental partners, ENGOs in particular, to advance and are part of these mitigation plans that I referenced that are a detailed articulation of what are you going to build, how are you going to build it, and when are you going to build it in such fashion as to be able to minimize, prospective impacts.
Awesome, sounds great. So next question is from Laisa again, and it's, how is the energy created going to be transported to the land, and how can that affect the ecosystems around it?
Mm-hmm. So, wind turbines turn in the prevailing winds, and so they take kinetic energy out of the winds and translate it into electric power, right? That goes down. There's basically electrical cables that go from the generator down the tower, down into the bottom of the foundation, and then at the bottom of the foundation you start to have what is called a collection system or an array, which are all the electrical cables that, again, looking to this picture, you can think about like a string of Christmas lights, like underneath, they're all connected underneath on the ocean floor. So there's electrical wiring between each of these turbines, and they collect into what's called a substation that helps to amplify the voltage of the electricity that's being cultivated and going into a cable that, and I don't know if I have I don't think I had a good picture of this. That's unfortunate. We have lots of great pictures on our website, so please do. I encourage you to go check out NYSERDA or offshorewind.ny.gov when we're done here. But nevertheless, there is an aggregation of all of those cables into a substation, and then the substation serves as sort of the highway, or like the on-ramp to the highway. And so there's a cable that, a larger cable that is a transmission cable that brings the power to shore. The power is brought to shore by a process typically called horizontal directional drilling, which is basically just, it's dug deep underneath the beachhead. You can literally be sitting on the beach and never know that there's a cable going underneath you. This is how all of our telecommunications cables come to shore, by the way. And if you ever want to see some cool maps, there's some really great maps from NOAA about all the cables going everywhere right now that are giving us 5G and electricity. So they come onto shore and eventually connect into what's called an onshore substation. And so the onshore substation is when you actually connect to the grid. And so the substation helps to connect to, again, our transmission grid, which is statewide. And delivers power on literally a nanosecond basis, wherever it needs to go, but also a distribution grid, which is your local grid. And so when you look outside your window and the next time you see, power lines and the little transformers, then you know that those poles and wires, are part of your local grid. And that's where the energy eventually comes to, right? It's all part of a flowing power pool. So it's not just that offshore wind connects directly to your house, connects to the grid, and the grid flows into, both from transmission perspective at a high voltage basis, and then locally within your homes as well.
Great, perfect.
Sorry, can I ask her like one point of the question?
Yeah, go ahead.
So what if like something wrong happens with those cables under the water? Like how do that I'm just thinking like salt water, as far as I know, it's a good electrical conductor. English is not my first language, so I have some problems with this.
Electrical conductance, with salt
water.
Yeah.
So what if one of those cables break or something happen? Like, can that cause like an electrical something? Like, what is that type of impact?
Yeah, it can. There's lots of redundancies built into the wind farm. Again, there's lots of interconnections between the turbines themselves, and there's lots of interconnections to the substation. So if one single turbine goes out, the whole wind farm is not interrupted. So there's lots of redundancies that are part of that. But it is true. I mean, it's the same thing if a storm comes through and it knocks out a power line. It can knock out a power line. That is a risk. And so part of mitigating that risk, which is real, is by design, right? So how do you bury a cable, or do you use these concrete mattresses or other forms of solutions? And part of that is the question of, well, what are the risks? What is it that the turbine and its cables could be exposed to? And that may be different at different locations, right? If you're near an anchorage, right, then there's a reason why those areas are carved out of the map. Like, don't build a turbine here because there's going to be a lot of vessels, there's going to be a lot of anchors dropped, and so there's going to be interferences with cables. So we're trying to avoid that. Risk is a function of exposure, right, and outcomes, so we're trying to minimize that exposure to risk by smart siting. So it's a great question, and it's certainly possible that there are interactions between vessels or other natural factors that may come into play, but we're trying to minimize them by design. Great question though.
Perfect, thank you. All right, so the next question is actually from me. I asked, what kind of scientists will be needed for the offshore wind projects, like specifically? Because I know you had a slide and you put scientists, but like in specific.
Sure. So you could be a specialist in benthic habitat. You could be a specialist in cetaceans, so whales and dolphins. You could be a specialist in, in various forms of fish, right? You could be interested in the water column. You could be interested in ocean acidification. You could be interested in a lot of things. And what I don't mean to be dismissive. What I think is probably really good would be to check out next month. There is a State of the Science workshop that we are hosting. It's the second time that we've done it. So November 16th and 17th, I think. And we can check it out with our website. The State of the Science workshop is really about local leadership, but also regional to the US and international. So what do we know about acoustic sciences in a marine environment? Let's go there. Let's talk about, again, all the different species and ecosystems that exist. What is the latest in ocean acidification science? So it's a giant convening, and it's going to be digital this year, and I think it's going to be open to students. So let's find out as to what the various forms of science that are at play in the space, right? And it's really about oceanographic sciences overall, right? Meeting with sort of the industrial application and or specific interactions between that environment and this equipment.
Great, thank you.
Of course.
Awesome. Our next question is from Judy Zinger, and she's asking, will installation and later O&M projects be living on the installations or going home every night?
That is a great question, and it really depends upon where the project is. So the further that a project is, the more likely that you're going to have this sort of shift approach, similar to like when you think about a mining operation, right? You may be working a couple of weeks on and then you'll be a week off. So there are, for some of these projects that are quite far, I mean, when you look at this map and you see the Vineyard Wind lease area to the furthest, on the furthest east, that's quite a ways from home. So you would spend most of your day, commuting back and forth from the wind farm, which is probably not very effective. So what you would probably be doing is hoteling, if you will, on either on the substation platform or on a vessel. And there are specialized, like a big hotel boat that's part of this industry as well. Where, if you are a service technician, then you would be working there for a couple of days or weeks at a time. So you'd have, on and off shifts. For projects that are much closer, and we look at the Empire lease area, for example, it is planning to have its operations and maintenance stage out of the South Brooklyn Marine Terminal in Sunset Park. And there it will be possible to be doing more of a day shift type of approach, just based upon the proximity there to the location. So it's a bit of a hybrid approach. Each project and its workforce, will come to its own determinations based upon needs, and a lot of it is preventative maintenance cycles that are planned and executed, and then obviously there's responding to like all of our electrical workers currently do, responding to changes and outages or issues that crop up from time to time.
Perfect. All right, the next question is from Noah. This is a big question. For onshore facilities to distribute power, are there new facilities, renovated, both? Also, in the development of new infrastructure, are there plans to focus on the creation of microgrids for the new power generation methods?
Great questions. So as far as onshore infrastructure is concerned, it's a bit of both. So the substations to which an offshore wind project, you aggregate the power offshore and then you bring it to shore with a cable and you connect to the grid. When you connect to the grid, that is an existing substation. However, that existing substation will need more componentry. So you're expanding off of that substation. Certainly the good substations, the ones that are most desirous for the industry and for New York to be looking and supporting connections to, are the ones that already have significant space, both electrically, like they've got they've got a bus bar that you can plug into. So it's like literally if you go to, your wall in your home, and have I got a plug there, right? Or do I need a power bar? Well, you're going to want to plug in where you've got physical space. So those are the ones that, that are prioritized by the industry. So it's an existing substation with existing capacity, so existing plugs, but also the ability to add, the necessary additional equipment to accommodate what are huge injections of power. And the second question, pardon me, Bianca, can you repeat the second half of the question? I think it was about microgrids, right? Yeah.
It says, also in the development of new infrastructure, are there plans to focus on the creation of microgrids for the new power generation methods?
Got it. So microgrids are really, a very exciting topic, but part of the challenge here is we're sort of talking about polar opposite ends of the spectrum from a power sector. So when we talk about offshore wind, we're really talking about large scale wholesale electricity to service like our grid. So it is more about the large size of the power that we're talking about versus the specific benefits of a microgrid. So a microgrid is also a very cool topic, and there are definitely benefits in specific areas, from an electrical perspective, from a resiliency perspective, to having microgrid potential. But it's also the overall benefit of having a robust grid on a statewide basis. That's really where offshore wind's sweet spot is. We're not talking about small scale power when we talk offshore wind. We're talking like huge power. So they service different needs, and we can think about them most appropriately that way. So if you have specific needs in a community, it may be electrically beneficial, given your exposures to conceiving of a microgrid. It is also highly beneficial to have, robust, large-scale renewable power available on a statewide basis and on a cost-effective basis, because that's really what we're talking about here, is just the largeness of the resource and of the project is helping to drive cost efficiencies that are just not achievable on a small scale. So they're different tools for different needs electrically.
All right. So our next question is from Peter McCartt, and it's a follow-up from something you mentioned before. And he's asking, what are the difficulties or constraints of the mainland issues, such as transmission or new ports?
Yeah, so that's a great question, Peter. And so, development is always, it's tricky business, right? You have to think very carefully about what you're proposing, where, how will it interact with the communities that are there? How involved are they in the determination of what infrastructure is happening where? We live in a highly democratic state, and really excited for the opportunity to discuss all of our collective infrastructure needs in a very open and transparent process. And so I think when we think about port infrastructure needs, there's a lot of potential. New York has lots of really great port assets, but they're in need of shoring up. And so where and how should we be helping to support port infrastructure investments? That is in part a question of, well, what services the industry's needs, right, and helping them to deliver successfully on their projects. But it also speaks to what are the other uses potentially of a site? Is that a site that a community would want to have for green jobs? The Sunset Park discussion with the South Brooklyn Marine Terminal is a great example of that conversation that's been happening live. The Sunset Park community in Brooklyn is, long since been saying we want to make sure that we have, green jobs through a working waterfront. That's our self-determined vision of our community. There has been development plans to say, hey, let's put up condos. And they're like, nope, we don't want the condos, we want a port. And so you get this really interesting opportunity where offshore wind is actually buttressing you know, what has been a very long and difficult discussion for that community to say, you know, we want green jobs, we want manufacturing jobs, we want, you know, a working waterfront rather than, you know, necessarily a recreational waterfront, or a mixture of those aspects. But that's for a community really to be deciding. And so we look to the assets and, you know, understanding that, and if you can build an offshore wind port, it can do anything else. And the more that we think about decarbonizing our economy, we think about, you know, other things that we can do from a maritime basis, you know, beneficial transportation that is happening on a water basis versus, you know, trucks and traffic and the like. So we're starting to see that there is a renaissance with regards to port infrastructure and its benefits for a carbon-free economy broadly. And then again, offshore wind is serving as this sort of early catalyst to really amp up those needs. But it is not without discussion. And so, you know, with any infrastructure, it has to be done in consultation with the local communities and where it's being presented. And that goes the same with, you know, the electrical parts as with ports.
Awesome. So the next question is from Judy, and she asks, how much static is there now from wealthy NIMBYs?
So, you know, the term NIMBY, which is NIMBY, when not in my backyard, it's an unfortunate term, and one that, you know, we're, especially at this, as you know, a representative of New York State, it speaks to a lack of understanding. You know, at that point in time, the conversation is no longer rational. And we try to keep it as rational as we can, right? We're here to be proactive, helping to offer, you know, education, information. And we think that, you know, people will make a very informed decision if they're equipped to do so. And that's, you know, really a big part of our job, is making sure that we are sharing that information so that we can keep the conversation about, you know, an understanding of the opportunities, but also the impacts, right? And an honest discussion about both simultaneously. And so there are, you know, certainly there are individuals who have, you know, very specific interests, and I'm not going to be able to convince them, but I think there's a vast majority of New Yorkers who understand, you know, the prospect of clean energy, who understand the need for projects to deliver on these goals, and that there is a strong benefit, you know, particularly from a clean air perspective, from a carbon mitigation perspective, that we need to be doing more for climate action now. And those voices, I'm very pleased to confirm, you know, vastly outweigh the few. They don't sell as many papers, you know, and they're not as click worthy. You know, we all want the juicy bits, but the vast majority of New Yorkers want climate action now, and they understand that offshore wind and renewable energies overall are, you know, a major solution that we have in our toolkit today.
All right. Our next question is from, hello, Lauren. I'm Lauren Bross of Sustainable Westchester. She's pretty awesome. I should have recognized her earlier for being on the call. She was very influential, instrumental with putting together the City of New Rochelle's Energy Advisory Committee. So it's really cool having her on this call. Lauren's question is, what can we do about NIMBY's fighting against offshore wind? Just recently, a project application for Cortlandt Manor, the home of Indian Point, was pulled from the efforts of opposing folks.
Voices, you know, we're here listening to voices. I heard awesome voices, you know, at the outside of this call, right? We all need to make our voice heard, and, you know, the ability to have, you know, constructive discussions in a community to understand, you know, what are the pros, what are the cons, you know, to do that calculus in a way that is respectful and public, you know, and transparent is is incumbent upon all of us. So I would encourage, everyone here who's very active in this conversation, and it's fabulous. I'm really excited by all of your questions. It's learning about the technology, learning about its prospects, learning about the implications, and then what does it mean to you and your community? What can you be doing to be part of, the solution? And it doesn't mean that, development isn't always, either good or bad. It's nuanced. There's pros and cons to everything, and it's about finding that right balance, but also recognizing that we have a huge need overall as a state to do our part in the global fight against climate change and in the local fight against climate change, and we need as much of this power as we can in order to realize on those benefits. And so we just encourage as much of a proactive and constructive conversation on all of these topics, and that's exactly what this webinar and every voice that we've heard to date is probing that question, and much to your credit, that's what we're here for.
Great. All right. The next question is from Cyril, and he is asking, what specific trainings would you recommend to a student for job placement in this growing field?
Really depends upon your interests, right? I mean, what are your special talents and needs, and what are your career aspirations? Do you see yourself as a service technician climbing a tower, or are you more of a computer person and interested in helping to man an operations and maintenance facility? I mean, these like giant dashboards of all of the energy outputs and the electrical like live feedback that you're getting from the turbines in their farms. Those are totally different skill sets. Likewise, are you really good with your hands? Are you a welder? These pieces of equipment are just phenomenally they're just exacting in their quality and their standards. So, whatever your interests are, there's a diversity of jobs that, again, the industry will be looking for. A lot of it is, science-based, STEM-based, but there's also a lot of softer skills, if you will. There's lots of, communications work. So maybe you're interested in business administration, or you're interested in, financial analysis, or you're interested, it's a huge sector. So I would flip the question back and say, well, what is it that your interests are? How do you fit into that? And then to be mindful of these training initiatives that are going to be rolling out within the next 2 to 3 years that will offer, I would say, more complementary skills or finishing skills, if you will. But the foundational knowledge is really a lot of the same sectors that that you may already be, same areas of study that you already may be focused in, right?
All right, thank you, Adrienne. So we kind of are coming to a close right now. We're over the program length. We have 4 more questions. So what we can do is, that's because we don't want to exhaust you too much. We can email you the questions with the contact information for people to respond back to.
Great.
Yeah, because I think that.
Yeah, I love that. Please do. I'd be more than happy to answer. And I'm not exhausted. This is exciting. This is a great conversation, and the questions are awesome. So thank you so much.
Okay. So I guess at this time, I got a question. So I guess at this time, I would like to thank you, Adrienne, for giving us your afternoon and giving us information and insight about this emerging technology and throughout the state of New York and offshore wind. This is going to be recorded, so we'll be able to share this with students that weren't able to participate in this webinar, and also to instructors for academic institutions. We're home to numerous institutions of higher education in Westchester County, so the word will get out about this. So do you have any closing statement that you'd like to share with us, or?
Sincere thanks. This has been a lot of fun, and again, huge kudos, Paul, to you and in your efforts in organizing and hosting this just flawlessly. So well done, Paul. But also, Caitlyn and Bianca. It's been such a pleasure to hear the strength of your voices and your convictions. You have just such incredible, bright futures ahead of you all. And so thank you so much for organizing. Thank you so much for hosting. And thank you all for the questions. It's been a lot of fun.
Yep. Thank you so much. Thank you again, Monica and Ann. I guess I'll shift the floor back to you, Ann and Monica. Is there anything else you want to add?
I just want to thank you all. Thank you, Paul and Caitlyn and Bianca and Adrienne. This was wonderful. I learned so much, and I think everybody did. And the future is looking really different right now than it looked before we started. It looks entirely different. And thank you for that. We need it right now. And the students all know now to go for what you care most deeply about, because the jobs will be there. They will be diverse, they will be deep, they will be broad, and you will find your way. But go for what you care most about, what you're passionate about. Is that right, Adrienne?
Sure is. Sure is.
Right. Thank you. We're so grateful for this vision of a good future, a positive, happy future where we can all build our lives. So you take good care, Adrienne. Good luck in your work. We're so grateful to NYSERDA, you and your colleagues, for what you're doing.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all, everybody. And thank you, Paul. Good job.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you, everyone. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Ann.
Thank you, Peter. So glad.
Peter, yeah.
Okay, everybody. And happy. Look forward to working with you.
Great.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for being on, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Take care. Have a good weekend.
Have a good night, guys. Be safe.
Good night.
Thank you so much for the information.
Great job. Great.
Yeah, so is there anything else to add? Should I talk to you offline, or is this still being recorded?
Yeah, we'll go offline, Paul.
Oh, okay, because I want to know.
So thank you, Bianca. So grateful for your work. Everybody, this was great. Thanks for being on.
Okay.
Chuck, glad you got on. Pretty awesome, right? Nortrid, glad you were on. Thank you. Oh, you're muted.
I know, but
Okay. Good. Good. Kevin, thank you for being on. Super good. Super good. Okay.